One thing that came out in the book, Bill, is that men sometimes struggle with relationships, that they're oftentimes very reliant on their spouse to form social connections, that men oftentimes do have some of their closest social networks through work. So I do think it's a great idea for men to think about building out their non-work social networks prior to retirement. In fact, a lot of this stuff is best thought of things that in the 10 years before retirement, you start thinking about these things, you start building out those activities and those relationships. You don't want to show up in retirement without having thought some of these issues through. It's not too late. If you are coming into your 50s and haven't the inclination to really care about your health, about healthy diet and exercise, that even small incremental changes starting at a fairly advanced age is still much better than just kind of sticking with the old habits. So I loved that. We talked about selecting healthcare plans. Carolyn is very much in favor of traditional Medicare, original Medicare, plus a supplemental policy for people who are of Medicare age in lieu of the Medicare Advantage plans that are oftentimes pushed so heavily by the insurance companies. She, as a doctor, prefers the original Medicare plans. I love to talk about bucketing because I feel like it's a really helpful kind of behavioral hack. It helps people take asset allocation, which seems really black boxy, and it makes it a little bit clearer. Okay, here's why I would hold X amount in cash. Here's why I would hold X amount in bonds down the line.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like it's a time segmentation approach. You're looking at a liability matching portfolio where, okay, I need 2 years of expenses in cash. I need, because of market risk, another 6, 7, 8 years of expenses in short and intermediate term bonds. And then my growth portion is what's left over there. That's my greater than 10 years bucket. I like this idea too, because it does appeal to those that, like me, that like sinking funds. Welcome to Catching Up to FI, a podcast on mindset, money, and life for late starters of any age on their journey to financial independence. I'm Bill, and I'm a late starter.
I'm Jackie, and I'm also a late starter, and we're your host. We're here to help you on your journey to financial independence, no matter where you're starting.
We're going to talk to experts, other late starters, and explore topics related to our mission.
Join us as we catch up to FI together.
Welcome to Catching Up to FI. Are overjoyed to have a repeat guest, a repeat offender here with us today. Christine Benz is our guest. She's come out with a new book in September on retirement, sort of the modern day retirement. It's called How to Retire, 20 Lessons for a Happy, Successful, and Wealthy Retirement. Jackie, she doesn't really need an introduction, but why don't you give her one anyway?
Yeah, let's do it. We're so happy to have her back again. So as we mentioned, this is Christine Benz, and she joined us last year on episode 77, and we are thrilled to have her back. And she will be talking about her new book that we both just got through reading and we loved it, How to Retire, 20 Lessons for a Happy, Successful, and Wealthy Retirement, which is already a bestseller. That's no surprise. We got to hang out with Christine at the last two Bogleheads conferences. She is president and board member of the John C. Bogle Center for Financial Literacy, and that is the nonprofit that puts on the Bogleheads conference. We had an amazing time in Minneapolis this year. Their mission is to expand Bogle's legacy by promoting the principles of successful investing and financial well-being through education and community. She is director of personal finance and retirement planning at Morningstar and is co-host of their podcast called The Long View. The podcast features in-depth interviews with thought leaders in interesting investing topics and personal finance topics, and some of them ended up in the book. She is a frequent public speaker and is widely quoted in the media, including the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, Barron's, CNBC, and PBS. In 2020, Barron's named her to its inaugural list of the 100 most influential women in finance. And in 2021, Barron's also named her as one of the 10 most influential women in wealth management. In her free time, Christine works with underprivileged women to improve their understanding of personal financial concepts. Christine, we are so thrilled to have you back on the show. Welcome back to Catching Up to FI.
Jackie and Bill, it's so great to be here. I love what you two are doing with this podcast, so it's really an honor honor for me to be here with you.
Yeah, I mean, it's been a pleasure to meet you, hang out with you. You signed my book. I'm so excited about that. I love collecting autographed copies of authors' books, and I've marked it up so it's mine only. Nobody else gets it. And I've learned so much from this book. It's an interesting format. You're a podcaster and a journalist at heart, a writer, and you combine both of your strengths here because you reached out to 20 of your friends, our friends too, many of whom have been on our show, and asked them specific questions that everybody has about retirement and how to live a happy retirement in the modern day. So we're going to try and get through these 20 lessons, but we'll probably focus on a few and we'll see where we end up based on time constraints. But the one thing that was interesting to me too is you reached out to Jonathan Clements for the foreword. Tell us a little bit about why you did that and how meaningful it is to us these days, personal finance arena.
Yeah, so Jonathan Clements, as many of your listeners will know, was a longtime columnist for the Wall Street Journal. He was a personal finance columnist for many years and now runs a blog called Humble Dollar, where he contributes blog posts. And then there are these external contributors there as well. So he's just been a phenomenal resource to so many of us who are evangelists for the idea of simple, low-cost investing. When I was initially starting at Morningstar, I was part of our analyst team, and I remember feeling like I needed to read the Wall Street Journal from cover to cover, like every day, which is about as time-consuming as it sounds. But I remember coming back to Jonathan's columns. I think they were on a weekly or so cadence, and just thinking, this guy is really cutting out so much of the noise. He's telling people what they really need to know. So he very much guided my own thinking on investing, helped form my own thinking. And I've just admired his work so much over the years. And so he was a natural person for me to ask to write the foreword for the book. More recently, Jonathan has been talking about a cancer diagnosis that he received earlier this year, where he is battling a terrible form of lung cancer, but he's been sharing his journey with all of us, the financial and non-financial dimensions of grappling with a terminal illness at a fairly young age. I think Jonathan's in his early 60s at this point, and it's just been incredibly moving and lovely to hear Jonathan's perspective on life and potentially a shorter than expected life and what he plans to do with his remaining time. So he agreed to do the foreword to the book before he received his diagnosis, but in hindsight, knowing what we know now, it's even sweeter that he agreed to do that foreword for me.
Now, you did a shout out for him at Bogleheads. You had the whole audience get up and say, thank you, Jonathan. Can you give us feedback on how he received that?
Well, I don't think he's received it yet. So we have yet to produce that video and share it with him, but I assume that he'll be moved. I think that so many people who are followers of Jack Bogle very much also relied on Jonathan Clements for their financial trajectories and their healthy financial affairs. So I think Jonathan will appreciate seeing the huge impact he's had on so many people.
Yeah, and even though his foreword wasn't one of the chapters, it kind of was in and of itself. And I've taken it to heart the way that he's publicly talking about his illness. That's how I'm going to go out. So, Bill, if I ever get diagnosed, I'm going to say, Bill, I want to openly talk about it just like Jonathan did. And I just feel differently about it. So I'm sure that he has impacted a lot of people and the way they look at getting bad news like that. He's turned it into something that I think will help so many people. So you couldn't have gotten a better person to write the foreword.
Yeah, thanks, Jackie. He said that he wants to use his remaining time to spend it with people he loves, doing the work he loves. And the work he loves is imparting financial education to all of us. And I love that he's continuing to do that.
Well, he's kind of a leader and a disruptor in the forefront of things. And his transparency, honesty, and acceptance of his diagnosis and how he deals with it is actually telling us. I mean, it's new. I haven't read this anywhere else. And it's telling us how to live our lives and how to die our lives too in a healthy, wealthy, and intimate fashion.
He talks about how we don't hear from the dying. And he's right that oftentimes people are too ill to really share what they're going through, or maybe the death is very abrupt and there isn't the opportunity to reflect. So he has said that he feels like he's in somewhat, not completely unique, but not many people have that ability to be completely compos mentis and able to share what they're thinking and feeling.
But Christine, what we want to know now is, of the 20 stories, is there one that stands out, or is it hard to pick one of those?
It's very hard to pick. I loved all of the conversations that come out in the book. I do have a couple that really stand out in my mind as things that I found to be especially useful, important conversations. So one is the conversation with Laura Carstensen, who is a researcher at Stanford, and she's head of the Stanford Center on Longevity. And we talked about what leads to success later in life, contributors to longevity, as well as the importance of relationships later in life. And she referenced some of the research that's been done over the years that very much points to the importance of relationships, who you love, who loves you. It turns out that it means everything to human happiness and satisfaction, and that continues into our later years. So I love the conversation because she talks about how our social networks actually winnow down a little bit as we age, that we self-select into smaller peer groups than perhaps we had when we were younger. And she points out that that's perfectly healthy, that we're actually choosing to spend time with people who really light us up. Our favorite people are the people who we're spending more time with. But she also points to the value of diversifying your social network, just as you diversify your portfolio as you age, because things happen in life, that people move away, they may become sick and die. So people who were in your close inner circle may no longer be there. So it's important to be kind of lining up your next line reserves. And I think that's something that people should bear in mind as they move into retirement. They're probably leaving or at least reducing in importance a social network that may have been important to them when they were working. So those colleagues, those peers at work will probably play less of a role in our lives as we age. And so it's important to supplant them with other people who we enjoy spending time with. So that's one chapter that I loved. And then Jordan Grummet's final chapter of the book. Jordan Grummett, I know, is someone who you have had on the pod before, and he's one of my favorite thinkers, speakers in this whole area. And he talks about the value of taking stock of what you want to accomplish with your precious time remaining, and just making sure that you are being deliberate so that in the end, you don't have regrets about how you lived your life. So Jordan is a hospice doctor, and he talks about the value of what he calls small P purpose and big P purpose. The big P purpose is something that oftentimes really hangs people up. They feel what he calls some purpose anxiety, where they're like, oh, I should be doing something big, but I'm not sure what that is. So his very reassuring point is that a smaller set of what he calls small P purposes, and that might be things like just being a fabulous partner to your spouse, or being a wonderful parent, or repursuing some childhood hobby that you really loved that you haven't had time for. That a set of smaller P purposes is just fine too. And maybe you will stumble onto some big P purpose, maybe you won't, but that's okay. Just have some types of purposes, some things that really motivate you and that you can look forward to almost every day.
Yeah, we just recorded with Jordan, and his show comes out 2 days before his new book comes out, The Purpose Code. And the Purpose Code permeates the entire amount of stories that you have, because you talk a lot about the softer sides of retirement, which are probably 80% of the battle, really. The numbers are a good foundation, but in reality, we struggle more with the softer sides. And I fully resonate with Laura Carstensen's take on diversifying your relationships. I was just at a new CUtFI meetup for Knoxville. They're reigniting that one here, and I'm hanging out with people in their 30s and 40s. And I think as I get older, staying in touch with the youth, I can call that, is really important. I have friends who are 70, I have friends who are 40. And I think that's a critical element of diversification of relationships, because you don't want everybody to die at the same time as you or outlive everybody.
That's 100% right. And another thing, Bill, it's something that gives me pause about some of these communities, that as much as there is to like about them in terms of supplying activities for older adults, where you have a community of people who are all in the same general age band, that's probably not the best model. That if you do choose to live in one of those communities for older adults, you'd want to make sure that you have a regular network or a regular connection to people who aren't your same age, for exactly the reason that you identified, that age diversity in our friends network is super important.
And interest diversity. I mean, you don't want to have all like-minded people that all play pickleball.
Exactly.
Or that they are all doctors. Bill, you have doctors, you have financial friends, and your co-host is a younger co-host. So, and she's a
Yeah,
woman.
actually, I don't resonate with the medical community as much. 80% of my friends are outside of it. So I fully concur with Laura Carson's take on it. And I think that is a pivotal, critical element of how we age, is who we age with.
Absolutely. It's who loves us, who we love, and who we bring into that network. And one thing that came out in the book, Bill, is that men sometimes struggle with relationships that they're oftentimes very reliant on their spouse to form social connections, that men oftentimes do have some of their closest social networks through work. So I do think it's a great idea for men to think about building out their non-work social networks prior to retirement. In fact, a lot of this stuff is best thought of things that in the 10 years before retirement, you start thinking about these things, you start building out those activities and those relationships. You don't want to show up in retirement without having thought some of these issues through. And building out social networks is something that I would put on the docket.
Well, that transitions great to Fritz Gilbert. And our friend Fritz, who I finally got to meet in person at FinCon, he is big on sort of the 3 to 5 years before retirement, a checklist of things in retirement. It's not financial, really. It gets down to the nitty gritty. Can you tell us a little bit about his lesson?
Yeah, Fritz has said this is one of the most popular posts on his blog, where he walks people through what to do in the 5 years leading up to retirement. And I love how specific and granular it is. So it's certainly a bunch of financial things like deciding what you're doing with respect to long-term care. And if you're in the pre-Medicare age zone, thinking about where you'll go for insurance. He definitely does discuss those things, but he also talks about some of these softer things. So Fritz and his wife relocated in retirement. He makes the very great point that if that is your plan to retire in some other place, that you really should make plans to spend a serious amount of time there prior to retirement. Just don't go on vacation there. Experience it as if you lived there. And that means checking out the quality of the Wi-Fi and thinking about where you'll meet people. So I love that he gets so specific about the financial and non-financial jobs that you need to do prior to retirement. And then he also talks about decoupling from work, some of the things you need to do before you depart work, like get any contacts off your email that people you want to stay in touch with, or any photos that you happen to have on your work devices, making sure that you're saving those if you want to save them. So I just love how thorough and specific Fritz is in all things. And then I also just love Fritz's personal example of a charity that he and his wife have started and pursued since they retired, where they live in rural Georgia and they are building fences for dogs who would otherwise be on chains in their yards and sort of constrained to a very small space. So with this charity, they are helping animals and they're animal lovers, but they're also meeting like-minded people. They're getting some physical activity. They're outside, which a lot of research points to as being really healthy for us if we can make sure we're spending time outside. So it ticks a lot of boxes. And I think that's just a beautiful illustration of how to do retirement. If your plan is to retire fully, Fritz's point is that you can have a very rich life, even if you're no longer pursuing work.
Yeah, a lot of what Fritz was talking about definitely resonated with me because I did retire, and all those little things about getting stuff off of your computer and getting pictures off and all of that. So I enjoyed his detail. So I did have kind of a favorite one. First of all, I loved them all, but one that really resonated with me was Jean Chatzky, What Women Need to Do Differently. And you alluded to it a little bit in the relationship section, but can you talk a little bit about how it's different for women?
Yeah, definitely, Jackie. Several different dimensions. And for people who know Jean Chatzky, she's long been a superstar in personal finance, but this is a real passion of hers, is helping women become financially well. And there are a couple of things that are different for women. One is that longevity is on our side, that we tend to live on average a couple of years longer than males. And so that means that we need to lay the groundwork for that potentially extra long life where we are are making sure that our portfolios include adequate exposure to risky investments, which have better longer term return potential. We need to make sure that we're making smart decisions about Social Security because that's a lifetime benefit. Women are also much more likely to be caregivers during our lifetimes. And so caregivers for children, of course, but also for adult parents. When you look at the data on caregiving, providing long-term care for elderly parents, a lot of that is coming from adult daughters. And that can have repercussions for women's ability to continue working. Even though we have longer longevities to support, we may not be able to continue working because of some of these caregiving obligations. And then another dimension is because of that extra longevity, women are more likely to need paid long-term care than our spouses. So if we're married, we're oftentimes the caregivers for our partners, our male partners, but if they predecease us, no one's around to take care of us. And so Jean talked about a lot of those different dimensions, and I loved that she discussed that crucial topic because women do need to do a few things differently. When we look at women's investing behavior, what we see is that sometimes women do invest less aggressively than men. And because of that extra longevity, we need to do just the opposite. All else being equal, we should probably be a little bit more aggressive in terms of our investment positioning.
Yeah, women face significant challenges with regards to the income disparity and then child rearing and being able to save less potentially and the longevity. So the financial concerns of women in the retirement process are significant and I think underrepresented and underreported.
I think so too. When you look at the data, Bill, women are much more likely to be poor in retirement. They're also much more likely to be exclusively reliant on Social Security than men. And I would wholly agree that it has been quite under-discussed. It's an important dimension of this.
I thank you that you had this element of the book too. And Jean Chaskey is a thought leader and we need to get her on the show. Maybe you can help us with that.
Sure thing.
We do need to get her on the show, but I am glad that you had her in the book and that you did discuss this a little bit more because I definitely felt that myself at the time of my divorce. There was this huge disparity in retirement accounts. And a lot of it was because I was more conservative and my wages weren't escalating as much as my husband's. And then I have an aunt where it's exactly the situation where she cared for her husband before he passed away. And now it's just her. And it's just kind of interesting how some of the parallels that you see in some of these. So Jean's story just really resonated with me in particular.
And Jean discussed divorced women as well, Jackie, as you saw in the book. And she's been forthright about this, about how women sometimes do not get the right assets after a divorce, that oftentimes women do choose to stay in the home and oftentimes get the home equity that comes along with that home, but they might miss out on the retirement assets in the process. So I think good counseling there is really important, that women, certainly they need legal advice as they embark on divorce and grapple with divorce, but they also need to make sure that they're getting some financial planning advice about the best assets to go for in that situation.
One of the great things you have in this list of folks is a lot of women represented. And another of the women represented is Carolyn McClanahan. And I got to meet her and hear her talk at the Bogleheads. And as an emergency physician, she particularly resonated with me because that was her prior life, but she talks about a plan for healthcare. Can you give us some of the lessons there in her chapter?
Yeah, so Carolyn wanted to talk about everything healthcare related in that chapter, which I love. So it's quite holistic, the discussion. So we talk about how to extend our lives, how to extend our health, how to improve our health as retirement approaches. And I thought she left a really encouraging message, which is that it's not too late. If you are coming into your 50s and haven't the inclination to really care about your health, about healthy diet and exercise, that even small incremental changes starting at a fairly advanced age is still much better than just kind of sticking with the old habits. So I loved that. We talked about selecting healthcare plans. Carolyn is very much in favor of traditional Medicare, original Medicare, plus a supplemental policy for people who are of Medicare age in lieu of the Medicare Advantage plans that are oftentimes pushed so heavily by the insurance companies. She, as a doctor, prefers the original Medicare care plans. And then we discussed the uncomfortable topic of long-term care and how to pay for it. Unfortunately, there aren't many good answers in the realm of long-term care, where we've seen people who thought they were doing exactly the right thing and purchasing long-term care insurance have gotten socked with some really high premium increases, or they had to fight with the insurance company to get their payments for long-term care. So the long-term care insurance market is really troubled. We discussed how to deal with that and how to self-fund long-term care, or perhaps purchase one of these increasingly popular hybrid life/long-term care products. So all different dimensions there. I felt like it was a really holistic conversation about healthcare as well as long-term care.
Yeah, it was great to hear her go into that. We actually had an expert from Boomer Benefits talk about the whole Medicare thing. And boy, it opened our eyes. Even though we're not quite there yet, it's like we're close enough to care and to kind of understand some of those things. So as a doctor, it was kind of great to get her perspective. And so that one I enjoyed quite a bit as well. Let's see. I'm looking at like all the people you have in the book. It almost reads like a who's who of financial experts. So we're probably going to skip over some of them, but there's just an amazing list of people that you have in here and so many great takeaways. What were some of your other favorite ones, Bill?
Well, I want to hear from Christine's chapter and I want to hear from Wade Pfau's chapter, because I thought those two were particularly interesting. And Wade Pfau talks about something, and I got to read his Bible book on retirement, but Know Your Retirement Income Style. Can you take us through his style box? Because I thought that was fascinating.
Yeah, so Wade has created a style box for investors that help you self-assess on a couple of different metrics. So one of them is, to the extent that you want your cash flows from your portfolio to be more or less guaranteed, where they don't change, there's no variation, there's no ebb and flow in terms of your paycheck, whereas other people might be more comfortable with more variability. So kind of a safety first mindset versus comfortable with a little bit more volatility if it means that I might be able to grow my portfolio more over time. And then a few of the other metrics that you would score yourself on would be, to what extent do you want to kind of lock down a plan versus sort of figure it out as you go along. So an example of someone who just wants kind of a one and done retirement income solution would be attracted to some sort of a basic annuity type where it's just going to pay you that stream of income. But if I'm willing to revisit the portfolio as the years unfold, then perhaps a sort of traditional total return portfolio that I am pulling from would make more sense. So there's a questionnaire available that Wade has made available to people who have access to the book. And I would urge people to hop on there and there are a lot of questions, like a few hundred questions, I think, but take that questionnaire and you'll arrive at, or at least you'll have a sense of the general retirement income style that fits where you are. And we're all geared a little bit differently in this respect. And I think that's the real point of Wade's chapter, is that if you are a financial advisor who's just kind of recommending the same retirement income solution to all the clients who walk through your door, you probably shouldn't be doing that, because they probably are approaching this a little bit differently in terms of their mindset.
It makes me want to read his book more, because he's just really a genius when it comes to retirement planning. And it also shows too, you mentioned annuities. Not everybody agrees in your book. Everybody has different takes on annuities, different takes on portfolio strategies. So it's good to get the different perspectives. I mean, there's the William Bernsteins that hate annuities. There's the Wade Pfau's that are maybe more of a fan, as are you, I think, in talking about this. But one of the things you get interviewed about in your chapter in a lesson is you're a big bucketeer. Yeah. Let's hear about what your thoughts just generally on the bucketing approach to retirement planning.
Yeah, this is something that came into my realm of thinking when I was interviewing Harold Avensky, who is a financial planner, largely retired today, and was a professor of financial planning at Texas Tech. And when he was running his practice, Harold said, well, I just run a total return portfolio for my clients, but I also bolt on this cash bucket, this liquidity bucket that covers 1 to 2 years worth of their portfolio spending. And he mentioned to me that it really works works with his clients from a behavioral standpoint, that he'll call them during some sort of a market downturn, ask them how they're feeling, and basically they'll say, I'm okay because I know that I have this liquidity set aside, that my long-term portfolio can ebb and flow as it inevitably will. But if I have my cash flow needs set aside for at least a couple of years, then I'm fine with whatever goes on in that long-term portfolio. And he also found that having this cash bucket made his clients much less inclined to kind of swoop in and say, hey, do you think we should add more to US stocks and perhaps pull from international or whatever? His clients were much less inclined to micromanage the long-term portfolio allocations. So I've been an enthusiastic supporter of the bucket approach ever since. And I regularly hear from readers who say they've implemented something like Harold's bucket strategy, something like my bucket strategy. And they've basically said the same thing to me, that having that liquidity bucket and then maybe having the next line reserves of short and intermediate term high quality bonds, that gives them peace of mind amid the periodic stock market declines that we experience. So I love to talk about bucketing because I feel like it's a really helpful kind of behavioral hack. It helps people take asset allocation, which seems really black boxy, and it makes it a little bit clearer. Okay, here's why I would hold X amount in cash. Here's why I would hold X amount in bonds down the line.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like it's a time segmentation approach. You're looking at a liability matching portfolio where, okay, I need 2 years of expenses in cash. I need, because of market risk, another 6, 7, 8 years of expenses in short and intermediate term bonds. And then my growth portion is what's left over there. That's my greater than 10 years bucket. I like this idea too, because it does appeal to those that, like me, that like sinking funds. And what do you think, Jackie, about bucket?
Well, I was just thinking about you when it comes to buckets, because he loves Ally and Ally has the bucketing savings or whatever. But I love that idea and I love your approach, Christine. And I'm really glad that you included one of the chapter that was based on your experience and your thoughts. So I appreciated that, because you talked to all these other people, but we're kind of turning the tables a little bit and learning a little bit about your strategy. So I love the bucketing approach and I kind of use that now myself because I'm technically retired. So yeah, that was one of my favorite as well. I thought it was kind of interesting talking about buckets, the chapter with Mark Miller talking about make smart choices about housing, which is a big deal as we approach retirement. So talk to us a little bit about that one.
Yeah, Mark is a contributor to Morningstar.com as well as to the New York Times and I think Reuters. And he has a couple of different beats. One of them is healthcare. Another is housing and housing related decisions for older adults. And I felt like Mark added a lot with that discussion because you're absolutely right. It's an important component of our quality of life. Where we live means a lot. And then there's a financial dimension too, in terms of upkeep requirements of the house, whether there's an opportunity to potentially pull equity from the house. So we discussed all of the different dimensions of that. We also discussed the concept of aging in place that we often hear from older adults that, oh, I want to age in place. Everyone repeats that. Mark's point is that mostly people are saying, I don't necessarily want to be in an institutional setting, but that people don't need to be super literal about what aging in place means, that it doesn't need to mean the very home that you are currently living in, that your home is a lot to do with your community. It's a lot to do with your cultural activities, your leisure activities that you enjoy, your proximity to good healthcare providers or your favored healthcare providers. So Mark makes the point that take a look around, think about how appropriate your home is to age in and potentially be preemptive, that there's no time like the present to think about making a move to a smaller, perhaps, or more aging friendly home. And I thought that was such smart advice that I had kind of said, well, what if someone wants to stay in their home for like the first 10 years of retirement and move after that? And his point was, well, that gets harder, right? You physically may not be able to help move yourself. There are just a lot of things that get more complicated as you age. So if you are mulling the idea of relocation, maybe be a little bit preemptive. And he also talks about moving geographic locales, the sort of cost considerations that sometimes people are laser focused on moving to a low tax state, but they're not considering other costs that might come along with living in that place. So a common push-pull these days would be someone relocating to a lower tax state, but that is also encountering some climate issues that are in turn affecting insurance prices. So if you are thinking about relocation and cost as part of your calculus, and it inevitably would be, just be holistic in your review of what the costs are to live in a specific place.
Yeah, I mean, this is again is don't let the tax tail wag the housing dog. It's a lot of clickbait out there with regards to, oh, this is the state to live in.
Right.
This is the most financially feasible state, but you're giving up your relationships. You're having to start fresh. There's a lot of other considerations. And if you follow your kids, they're going to move. So sometimes aging in place and waiting for the dust to settle around you is maybe the better way to go. When my wife and I downsized, we downsized to basically a ranch house. We don't have to worry about steps into the house. We can truly age in place here, and it meets our needs not only now, but for the next 20 years or longer. My mom dug in and is aging in place in a split level home with all these steps everywhere. And I'm just waiting for the day that she falls and breaks her hip, which will be a catastrophe. We can't get her to move out. It is her home. This is where she's going to stay. And like with your talk with Cameron Huddleston, how you communicate with your loved ones, your elder parents, and we had her on the show talking about her book. It's really important. I sent her that book, but my mom hasn't read it.
Well, I really think that family is such an important dimension of housing decisions. Like a lot of times older adults do say that they want to age in place in the family home. And in some cases, they're doing it for families, that their kids have a sentimental attachment to that home. But sometimes those decisions do entail a lot of heavy lifting on the part of the adult children. As the parents age, there is a lot that goes on to keep the parents in that home. So I would say for people who are in that situation where they're mulling potential relocation, just think about what might be eventually required if you do decide to stay in that place, that you may be putting some weight on your adult children, and you'd maybe rather just have quality time with them when you get together with them versus them running hither and thither to try to keep your house in good shape. So I thought Mark was really helpful and holistic in his discussion.
Yeah, that chapter gave me a lot to think about. So I appreciate him talking about housing, not just like the four walls, but like your location. We had talked about before when you were on here, I have a great aunt that lived until she was 111. Well, she was in the community that she grew up in, and most of the workers knew her or her family. And I firmly believe part of the reason why she lived so long is because she was well taken care of by people that saw her like they were their grandmother. So that has a lot of value. Yeah, like I said, so many amazing people. J.L. Collins, Mike Piper's in here, Jenny Roselle, estate planning expert that we're going to have on the show. But you got to the conclusions, and the conclusions were very interesting. You talked about being willing to entertain different perspectives. Don't be afraid to be a weirdo. Tell us a little bit about that. And then we've got the one last one I wanted you to talk about, which was micro joys. So can you tell us what you mean about don't be afraid to be a weirdo?
Yeah, I thought that several people made the point that this is a new chapter of your life. And the point is, don't just have the retirement that your parents had or your friends are having, that this is a time to take a step back and think about, okay, this is a 25 or 30-year period, maybe more, maybe less. How do I want to maximize my remaining time? And Ramit Sethi in the book has a great discussion of spending in retirement. And his point for people at all life stages is if you are doing it right, you're taking a step back and thinking about how can I spend to align with my values, to what brings me joy. And his point is if you're doing it right, you will probably get some funny looks, that you might be the person who is fine spending $20,000 on an amazing trip somewhere, but yet you're still driving a 15-year-old car because your values are the amazing travel, not so much for cars. And so I think it's a great idea for people at this life stage to kind of take a step back and say, what is my unique vision for this next phase of my life? And so, yeah, I would encourage people to read Ramit's chapter because he's super thoughtful on that topic of spending, which I think we tend to kind of under discuss because we spend so much time talking about saving and investing.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned also, in addition addition to not being a weirdo, you've got to entertain different perspectives. You've got to forget optimization. And we are optimizers in the FI space. What do you mean by that? Because your conclusions that carry throughout the book were really interesting. I love this chapter almost the best.
So even Bill Bernstein, in his chapter about portfolio construction, Bill's worldview is very much influenced by academic research, by history, market history. But even Bill says that the best portfolio is the portfolio that you can live with, that you can sleep at night. And that's why sometimes the optimal portfolio isn't necessarily the best portfolio. If you can't sleep at night, if you can't live with it, it's not the right portfolio for you. And I think that pertains to a lot of different dimensions of this, that you have what makes sense from a financial standpoint, and then you have what makes sense from a peace of mind, quality of life standpoint. And the two sets of considerations both count for equal amounts, in my opinion.
And Jackie wants to know, and I think your micro joys might dovetail a little bit with Jordan Grummett's message, but tell us about what you mean by micro joys and what they look like.
Yeah, so I think it's a thing, but I thought about it one day. I feel like I've had the opportunity to do so many amazing things in my career, and I've traveled really all over the place. But my favorite things are just very mundane things that I can do every day. So for me, I have kind of the big three are cooking, reading, and walking. And as long as I can do those things, ideally all three in a day, that's a good day for me. And they are cheap things. They're things that I can do with other people or solo. I guess I can't read with other people, but they're things I can practice with regularity. And that's the name of the game. That's what Jordan was talking about with his small P purposes. What are the things that just engage you, that you thoroughly enjoy day after day? Come into retirement with a few of those things, or maybe more than a few of those things, and you'll probably be just fine.
Yeah, I love the micro joy. What's your micro joy, Bill?
I concur with the walking. I look at it like a forest bath. I have my dogs. They're a macro joy, really, but they get me outside, and it's not Chicago anymore, so I get to get outside more of the year, and it's not frigid cold. But reading, doing this podcast is a micro joy of mine. And hanging out with Jackie, who could ask for anything better? Hanging out with Christine.
Yeah, I was waiting for you to say the podcast with Jackie.
What about you, Jackie? What are your micro joys?
Well, we have something in common. Walking, hiking, I enjoy that. I enjoy listening to podcasts and learning, and I enjoy mentoring. So those are a few. But it was great to talking about micro joys, because that is really important, even before we hit retirement, but definitely after we've retired and we don't have so many other things going on that's competing. So Christine, how can people find you and your book? And we just appreciate having you. This was like so valuable. We want to make sure we share your work and where people can reach you with everyone.
So thank you both so much for having me on. I love chatting with you too. In terms of how people can find me, well, I'm on Morningstar.com all of the time, writing articles, doing videos, and so forth. And in terms of the book, they can find it at any bookseller, whether you're a local bookseller or Amazon or any other places where you get your books. And then the podcast that I do is called The Long View, and I do it with a couple of my colleagues. And it's just mandatory ongoing learning, which I love. I have a feeling that's why you two love podcasting too. This opportunity to have great conversations with and connections with other people is really wonderful.
And we want to help people get to Bogleheads. Where is it next year? What can they expect? It's growing. And one of the things that I'm so impressed with is that you're embracing the younger generations at Bogleheads. When you think of a Boglehead, you think of kind of the gray-haired white man a little bit, because that's where it started. Just like when you think of fire, you think of the white tech bro. And it's blended now. It's looking very different because of you. Tell us where it is and how they can get there.
Well, Bill, I love that question, and thank you so much. So we have a great group of people on our board who have helped put together the conference, and I think kind of move it into this next era. And it very much is a goal to try to bring on younger Bogleheads. We have loved the connection with the FI community at Bogleheads. Originally, I think we were much more about kind of traditional aged retirement. Now we are encouraging younger investors to get there with us. The 2025 conference we're still still homing in on locations. It'll be either in Austin, Texas or San Antonio, Texas. We're still reviewing locations, but we are thinking Texas. And it'll be very likely in October, probably the back half of October. We're still working on dates for it and hope to announce it as soon as possible. We'll announce it through bogleheads.org and through the Bogle Center website, which is boglecenter.net. So people can look for updates. We will provide details as soon as we have them. But I just love how this thing has grown. I love how the breadth of speakers has increased. And I really do love that we are trying to diversify the group of Bogleheads, because really the message cuts across all income levels, all age bands. I think it's relevant, and there's a lot that we can talk about.
Although I think the chief benefit of Bogleheads is being there in person, you also provide all the videos online. So if you can't go, you can go to boglecenter.net, right?
That's right. And YouTube.
And you can see these wonderful speakers talk about fascinating topics across the breadth of personal finance.
Yeah, the conference is not inexpensive. It's not expensive as conferences go, but we do want to make the education that goes on at the conference accessible to everyone, regardless of their income and level of wealth. So we do provide those videos. We invest in sending a video team to be there and record all the sessions, and we'll be doing the same in 2025 as well.
Well, yeehaw, I think I'm going to end up in Texas next year. So hopefully I'll see you there, Christine. I'm like a nice warm place in October. I am there. We had such an amazing time. And a big part of that is meeting you. And we were able to be introduced to so many other people from this book, from the conference. So we just want to thank you for joining us today. You always make us a lot smarter. And we appreciate what you do in this personal finance space and how many people you touch with your education.
Well, thank you. Right back at you, Jackie and Bill. I really appreciate the opportunity to be here and love what you're doing with this podcast.
Well, thanks for hanging out with us on Catching Up to FI. We'll see you guys next week with another episode of Catching Up to FI.
So, Bill, as you know, we cannot do this show without our amazing staff and the people that help us put this on. Our social media maven is Diana Falk, and our editor is Fritz Brizard. We love them, and they keep us going.
Yeah, Jackie, I mean, this show wouldn't have the quality it has without our folks, our peeps. And we'd also like to give you a few calls to action for the show. We love our community, and we hope you love us back. If you would like to support the show and our mission to help late starters, you can do that at Buy Me a Coffee, which is a platform that allows you to make a donation. The link is in the show notes and on the website.
Check out the show notes for resources mentioned in today's show. Also, head on over to our website at catchinguptofi.com and check out our vetted resources, partners, and affiliates for discounts and their services, because we love sharing great deals.
Please share the show with others and head on over to our Facebook community to help us grow. If you prefer video, head on over to YouTube and watch the show there. We hope you've enjoyed this episode of Catching Up to FI. We would appreciate it if you could also leave us a 5-star review to help our message reach others.
And while we are financial educators that love to teach, remember that our content is for general education and information purposes only. We are not providing financial, legal, or tax advice. Always do your own research or consult a professional before making important decisions.
So, Jackie, we'll see our audience next time on Catching Up to FI. Cheers.